level the playing field. Government trade barriers, put them up, take them down, put them up for you over here, but you're okay to get over here. Doesn't depend if you're most favored nation status at all. These things really happen. Sometimes they're a lot more subtle than what I just said, except for the fact the idea of being most favored nation is a big deal. The US put a lot of tariffs on China coming over here. So all that happened was the Chinese diverted their pathway. Instead of going straight from China over here to the United States, they shipped their stuff down to Brazil. Brazil had most favored nation status, so their pathway went, instead of from China to the LA port, they went China to Brazil to the LA port. Yeah, it took another 2 weeks, and they made us slap a couple stickers on it, but they got by with 25% tariffs. They waived them all because Brazil's most favored nation. That actually is how it works. All the gamemanship is out there, and they play it nonstop as you go through. Tariffs. There are taxes on imported goods with the purpose of raising their price to reduce the competition. And you know what? Actually, there's some good reasons sometimes for it as you go through. Sometimes it's to protect the people on the inside. Sometimes it's because the people that are sending their stuff over, it's inferior products. That happens. The Wall Street Journal reported that Amazon carried over 11,000 different items that were illegal or in violation of different trade here in the United States, and almost all of them were actually from imports coming into the country, and Amazon was using a third-party mix to sit down and sell them. That being said, the tariffs often are leveled by a government with a specific purpose as you go through. Sometimes it depends how you sit down and tax on the tariff. A tariff is a tax not paid by the country that's selling the goods, it's paid by the buyer coming in. If there's a 25% tariffs on goods coming into the United States from China, the Chinese don't pay for it. It's the person buying it from China. They pay the 25%, plus all the other strange costs involved with importing goods as you go through. An ad valorem duty is leveled on the invoice value of the imported goods. There's different kinds of duties, and sometimes there's multiple duties as you go through. Here's a shopping list of duties. You get to pick and choose, or maybe you don't get to pick and choose. The government does, and it depends what day of the week it could be. A fixed sum levied on a physical unit for a good, that's called a specific duty. It's for that item. Only 17 items can come in. Actually, it's more like 200,000 items as you come in. A compound duty, a specific a number count, and ad valorem invoice count. Sometimes it's called a compound duty. And sometimes it's a variable in the set of difference between the world market prices and the local government. So there's a series of ones as you go through. The first time that you get involved in international business, you may have to sit down and hire an agent to sit down and assist you on the first 4 or 5 shipments. After that, some of the stuff, it can be, if you do it on a regular basis, really is pretty easy to do. But they also have non-tariff barriers called NTBs. They're really a discrimination against imports other than the imports duties. We really don't like that rice you're sending us from Alabama and Louisiana over here. We like our Japanese rice because our Japanese farmer raises it over here. So you know what? We're going to only let 200,000 pounds come into our country from your nation over here because we really focus in on making sure we support our own farmers here in Japan. Yeah, they have stuff like that where they sit down and they have discrimination against imports other than the duties themselves. They made to stop them as you go through, and instead to have a quantity limitation, the maximum you can only send is. One of the biggest problems between the U.S. MCA agreement that we have that really replaced NAFTA as you go through, Mexico agreed to all the conditions of the U.S. with no problem, and they're our #1 trading partner right now. We had the Canadians really held back in agreeing to the agreement because of the fact that they're worried about their dairy farmers, which have a considerable lobby in their government, and they're worried about the state of Wisconsin coming over and taking over their cheese and milk production and bombarding them with all their own cheesy products. That's actually a pun, but it's actually real. Okay, as you go through. So that being said, the NTBs really are another type of barrier. Sometimes there's a quantitative barrier. Sometimes there's a cultural barrier against having other types of goods like that. A lot of times there's a voluntary export restraint, not because a company is really being nice, trying to be a social community. No, they're worried about the government imposing something, so they put it on before the government does. So you have different things. That there's direct government participation in trade as you go through some direct negotiations about that product or that company sometimes. And then sometimes there's customs and other administrative procedures, and there's other aspects of doing it. Here's a couple of things. Remember who actually pays for the tariffs. Tariffs are open barriers, and you can see them up front. That's why they're open barriers. You can see it standing right there in front of you. There's a lot called NTBs that are not so obvious. And by the way, right now off the LA and the Long Beach ports, there's 100 ships trying to get into the country, and they've been sitting there for 3 or 4 weeks as you go through, kind of going through and not able to come in because the US doesn't want to have our ports open 24/7. Gee, is that a secret barrier that we don't know about? Is it a quiet barrier as you go through? And you know what? Every once in a while, power rules. A government may sit down and retaliate and sit down and say, okay, you violated the law, we're going to arrest you over here and put you in prison. And by the way, this really happens. It's happened about 5 times with major powers right now in the last year alone. The US arrests somebody, the Chinese arrest 2 or 3, the Iranians arrest 2 or 3, the North Koreans arrest them, and then something happens politically, and all of a sudden, all the charges are dropped miraculously. Yeah, it really happens. The government does intervene a lot of times, and sometimes if you don't sit down and comply, they'll slap on a tariff or 2, they'll put an NTB in the process. It could be that the ships don't get a lot to dock and unload, or it could be they arrest a citizen or 2. Unfortunately, it's part of the aspect of government and the trade barriers that go up sometimes between countries. Take care.